Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Blood Bowl Season 3 is upon us. I've already reviewed the starter set and some of the goodies that we can pre-order right now. But let's turn to some painting, and first up, how I created my Bretonnian Blood Bowl team.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
When I first played Blood Bowl back as a 13-year-old around 1993, I loved all of the little stories and all the artwork and all the fake histories about the different teams. And I love this polystyrene pitch and the different ends you could swap out with your Blood Bowl team names on. Obviously, these were all the studio names, and my friend and I had great fun making our own up and drawing pictures of the helmets and making our own logos. I don't have any of those to show you now, thank God. God knows how bad they would possibly look. But as a 47-year-old man, I thought I would have a go myself this time round and use Canva to knock up a logo, and this is what we have. We have the Bordelot Vintners. There's already another Bordelot team. I have a little of a fun idea about what this team should be, and this is my test paint. These are the colours I've come up with. I wanted something quite pastel, and this video I'm going to show you how I painted this miniature, how I came around the colours that I chose. Now, I've started with a black prime miniature, and I'm using my airbrush to create a fairly heavy zenithal. I want to keep a lot of the shadow underneath. Now, if you're not an airbrush user, you can still do something very, very similar to this. Maybe start with a grey prime and then lots of dry brushing, slowly building up the whites, maybe using some sponging as well. I'm not going to cover those in this video. I have already in previous videos, and I will do more that way, so my apologies if you're not an airbrush user. After this little airbrush zenithal stage, the rest of it is all standard painting to do. Hang in there, because there'll be plenty that you can copy just by priming this grey and dry brushing, or even just priming it white or an off-white colour and starting. But what I'm really trying to do here is add lots of highlights in, leaving shadow, so I can do so little of the later highlighting by using very pastel colours. And those two core colours, the blue and yellow, are going to be fundamental to this, outside of the armour bits and all those little extra parts on the miniature. To give the details an extra boost, I'm also dry brushing with white as well. So they're the new style, softer, rounder dry brushes. Very little white on there at all. I'm just trying to catch a few of the edges. What I don't want is streaky marks all over it. I want to be quite smooth. But by catching the edges, it really helps when you apply a contrast style paints, because you get that highlight showing through already, which saves you time. But also, if you're going to highlight over the top afterwards, it shows you where to place those highlights and really boost it, and just cuts down loads and loads of different layering stages later on in painting the miniature. And here are the two base contrast colours I'm using, Pilar Glacier and Bad Moon Yellow. I probably won't remember to shout out each paint that I use in this process, but I will be holding them up to camera. And then a day or so after I post this video, I will post up on my Patreon a list of all the colours used. That will be available to free members as well, so you don't have to join my Patreon at a pay level to get that list. It's just a way of displaying that information and not putting it in a video description, which is already full of lots of information already. It'd be hard to find. But what I'm doing here is I'm working with that base layer that I did with the airbrush and that dry brushing. I'm actually filling in the darker areas of these two colours rather than working from the edges, allowing the white to be the highlight that's there already. Now I'll come back and give that a boost afterwards, but I'm glazing this on very thin. You might just be able to see here, it's very, very thin coats, using that colour that's underneath to do the bulk of the shading of the miniature. And if you're really, really clever and really, really neat with it, then you almost don't need to go back and do highlights afterwards. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to choose this kind of colour on this miniature. I want the team to be relatively quick and easy to paint. So I'm almost sketching in with this blue into those darker areas first, and then just feathering it out slightly. And you can see I'm doing it even on the flatter areas of the shields. And then we move on to the yellow and doing a very, very similar thing here. A little bit more of an all-over colour, but because the yellow is so light and I'm putting a very thin coat glazing on, it's actually showing through all of that highlight that I have with the airbrush and those boosted lines from the edges from the dry brushing as well. I think it gives you a really, really nice effect, and you can leave that as it is by the time you've done this. You don't have to do the later stages of highlighting. I will at the end just to tidy it up and make it pop, but you could just handle your main colours like this, add in all the metallics, and then you're good to go. Hopefully you can see as it starts to dry on the miniature what the kind of final effect from using these sort of pastel tones over this very heavy zenithal, almost white based miniature. And I can just really gently draw in almost with this yellow paint just as a glaze, nice and neatly, letting it be a little bit darker in the shadowed areas and just blending it out a little bit towards those lighter areas, and you get this really nice transition built in. And this is what it looks like with just that blue and the yellow down. As you can see, you could leave that as it is. I will do, as I've already mentioned, a few highlights a little bit later on. But now it's time to get the rest of the colours down. This is Cygor Brown, and I'm just using this as the base for all of the leather straps and things. There's very little showing on the miniature, and you can kind of choose what colours you paint things anyway, of course. But he's got his main belt going around his waist here, which I've decided is going to be this leather brown, but he's got his little strap just visible here showing on the armour paint on the shoulder, and you've got a few other straps and things you could choose to do that way as well. It really depends on how you want your overall miniature to look. I've decided to use the same leather colour on his wrist straps and on his gloves and on his boots as well. It just gives it a little bit more uniformity. This is Garrigach Sewer, another contrast colour. It's a slightly different brown, and I want the ball to stand out as a slightly different brown. So this is a slightly warmer colour, a little bit more in yellow in tone, and it's giving it a very thin coat here, and you can already see that highlight that you get from using contrast paints. You just try to be neat with it, making sure that there's not too many streaks where we will come back and highlight that. Then we're on to one of my favourite skin triads. A base, a mid and a highlight are the simplest way, in my opinion, to do things like skin when you've got small areas to do like this. So we start with the base, nice even coat. Second layer, leaving a lot in the recesses, so focusing on the nose and the cheekbones, and then we move up to that final layer, and the top highlight very much just on the tip of the nose, maybe the tops of the eyebrows and the tops of the cheeks. There's not a lot of face showing here, so you don't have to do too much of the hard detail work. Then I like to tidy them up with some more glazes. I'm using Vulpes Pink and Shaiish Purple here, both contrast paints. The Shaiish Purple, I'm just using it straight out of the pot, and I'm using it to shadow. I'm just putting it around the edge of the helmet, around where it meets the skin, so it just gives you a little bit more definition and tidies up those edges. And then I move on to the Vulpes Pink. I have thinned that a little bit, and I'm using a wet palette, but just a little touch of water, not too much. And then I glaze it over the bottom third of the face, so at the end of the nose, and then the mouth and cheek area. Just gives a little bit more life to the overall miniature. Then after that I go back usually with the top highlights of flesh, just to pick out the tip of that nose again, a little bit on the chin, etc., just to make sure you haven't dulled that too much. And a very similar triad method with the metallics. I've got a dark metal with almost brown undertones for the base layer, and I'm covering all of the metallic areas in that. Then afterwards I'm moving on to that mid-tone, which will cover 80% of all of the metallic areas, leaving that darker tone in all of the recesses. And then after that again we use that very, very top type, the brightest, the mithril style metallic. So it doesn't really matter what paint range you use. You want to pick a very, very dull gunmetal kind of colour, or maybe something with brown tones, a nice mid steel and a nice bright silver at the end, and you will have your own favourite paints. Find three that work well together, and if you paint in triads, it just really, really helps you sort of know what colours to use next, and it helps you think about where the next highlight's going to go, because you know which colour you've got next to do. Obviously we're talking about gaming miniatures here, we're not talking about Golden Demon winning display. I'm talking about doing nice level gaming miniatures that will impress people if they look at them, but also you're definitely not going to win any awards for them. I don't know if you can see as I get to these sort of the brightest areas of metal here, how much brighter they are than the darker areas, and it's very much a case of thinking about where the light would be shining from, what areas would be catching the light and what areas wouldn't be, and applying those brighter paints, that brightest mithril colour here to those top areas. Exactly the same method here. I've made my own little triad here for the gold bird on the top of his head, and I want this to look a little bit too gaudy as it is, or gaudier than it should be anyway, so I've gone for quite bright golds, and those highlights then are quite subtle, but I'm going to be using some oil washes later which just tone them down and bring it sort of all together a little bit more. And as I move on to that, the very top, which is almost a yellowy gold highlight, you start to see a little bit more of a sort of differential between the darker colour, the most coppery colour, and the brighter gold, as if it's been handled or brushed more. Now it's time to start those highlights. This is boar hide and fur cloak. They're 2 thin coats paints. As I said, I've not mentioned every paint range I've used. They're very good at being a comparison to Citadel, and they've got their own conversion charts. So if you're a Citadel paint user, you'll be able to find almost exact copies of these paints in the ranges. But essentially, I'm finding paints that I can highlight on top of those contrast colours. So you're looking for a mid-tone and a highlight in most instances. And if you've got your contrast colour going over a nice Zenithal miniature, you'll have darker and lighter areas. So you want your mid-tone to almost match the lighter coloured areas, so you're not covering all of that contrast paint you've put down as a base layer, and then just a little bit less of the whatever you choose as your top highlight. Should you wish to do that, you can obviously use contrast paints as a one coat and done job as well, and they work very, very well for doing that. So this is very much, you can take parts of this painting video away, but you definitely don't have to follow it all as a tutorial. And exactly the same again, but these paints work well with the Garagax Sewer, which is that slightly yellower, lighter brown rather than the darker reddish brown. And you end up with 2 different browns then, so your brown leather for the board is different from the brown leather for the gloves and the boots and all the leather straps. And that is important. If you've got multiple leather areas on a miniature, you want to choose different spectrums of brown, different almost temperatures of brown, so that they stand out from each other. I could have gone for a very orangey brown as well here, but I think going for a lighter yellowy type and going for a darker reddish type gives you the most difference between the two. So just be careful if you're doing multiple browns to have distinct sets of little triads or colour pools to work from. I'm adding the basing texture now just so it's got time to dry while I'm doing some of the higher levels. I think that's the day job of being a commission painter. I'm always looking at saving time where I can, and why not have something drying when I can be working on something else. But we're moving on now to the highlights of the main clothing areas, and this is very much optional, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Because I use the Zenithal and those thin glazes, there's quite a lot of highlights showing through already, but I'm using a little bit of a very bright yellow here just to pick out the very, very sort of highest edges or edges of the fabrics of the clothing or any of the folds, just to make it really pop and stand out. Very much optional, and if you want to do something a little bit quicker, then you probably want to miss those kind of things off, but I just think it looks so much better just by adding a little neat line like that, and it doesn't take very long when you haven't got very many miniatures to paint as it with a Blood Bowl team. Same thing here, but this time I'm mixing the Pilar Glacier, which was that base colour, with a little bit of white, 50-50. It's on my wet palette and I'm keeping it quite thin. Same method though, just very, very thin edges around the edges of the fabric, but also just anything that's slightly raised just to really make it pop and stand out. And this is a good example of sometimes when you can't find the right highlight colour, especially with some of the really light contrast paints, and you want to give it a little bit of a boost somewhere. Just find just mixing a little bit of white with it. It stays quite runny anyway, and you can just use it as the perfect highlight, because you're just adding white to that colour, and it works out really, really well. To shade the metallics and to shade the texture base area, I'm using a pre-mixed oil wash. This is grease. It's a very sepia tone. So if you wanted to use something like Seraphim Sepia or whatever your paint range sepia washes, that would be absolutely fine. The reason I like to use oil washes is because they mostly evaporate and you don't get any tide marks from them, and you can wipe them away afterwards as well, which you'll see a little bit of shortly. If you've never used an oil wash before, don't be frightened to give it a go. There are some things that are helpful to know. Don't whack them over the whole miniature really, really heavily. You can take the paint off, but if you're very careful with them and you're using them over metallic paints, which are usually quite robust to start with, when you get used to them, you'll find they're a lot easier to use than you think, and they just have a really, really nice effect afterwards, and are extremely forgiving because you can wipe them away. You can rub it out, any mistakes that you have, and they run into all the recesses so much better than an normal wash. You can do all the pin washing stuff you may have heard about or seen on other videos. And then what you can see is here I've got a little bit of Artist White Spirit, and I'm just using it with a clean brush, a clean oil brush. Always use oil brushes for all your oil work. I'm just able to take away any of the oil wash which has dried on a flat area of a panel that I want to be shinier. I can just take it back off, leave it in all those recesses, and when it dries you get this just wonderful effect that's so much more realistic than using a standard wash. I'm using some of the decals, decals, transfers, depending on what you want to call them, from what part of the world you are in, from the starter set here. I'm actually going to go back and find some more from my old world Bretonnian sheets, I think. So I'm just using a fleur-de-lis on this one here, but I'm sure I've got some chalices or something somewhere that I can use to make some of the miniatures match the logo that I created a bit more. Then just brushing in some dry pigment onto the base and blowing it off. And I'm also popping on some wet mud effect here. I've got a video on applying decals, and I've got a video on doing basing. I'll try to remember to put links in them around now in the video, rather than extending the length of this video. If anyone's interested in those, you can go and watch them, and I talk all about the kind of products I use and my ethos around them. And then of course finishing off the base with a nice white stripe is always really cool for Blood Bowl. I think it's super easy to do, but it shows the chalk markings on the pitch and really makes the miniature look like a sports miniature more, rather than a Bretonnian knight that's lost his sword. Now I think it's fun to add a little bit of blood where you can here or there. This is just Blood for the Blood God from Games Workshop from Citadel Range. A little bit of it that goes over the white chalk mark as well, always looks good. Less is more. Use a little bit of water, blend it out, don't blob it on too thick. But here we go, he's all done. I'm happy with that as a test paint for the rest of the team. Let's look at some proper pictures. And just like I've just said, I'm pretty happy with the way that they've come out. The vision I had in my head for the team was that they were extra posh Bretonnians from the Bordeaux region, not Bordeaux, that would be the real world copy of it, and that they are vintners. They are a wine making region and wine making lords, and they're probably very, very disconnected with the real world and the troubles of their peasants, even more so than most of Bretonnia, and even more so showing it in their colour of their uniform, which clearly isn't practical for the very mucky, bloody job in hand and playing a game of Blood Bowl. But I think it works quite well from that aesthetic point of view, and also from a way that I can paint the rest of the team relatively quickly by spending that bit of time using the airbrush to start with to really build up the kind of the smoother white areas and the shadows there. Means that I can get those two base colours down of that pastel blue and the pastel yellow, and not have to do too much work with the highlighting to get them to look smooth and clean at the end, because most of it's done in the underpainting, which is essentially what I try and do an awful lot with my painting and base coating using contrast colours. And I think it's worked out all right. You have to let me know in the comments what you think, and if you're painting your own Blood Bowl teams, and have you come up with your own team names and your own team colours, and what goes behind those, how much detail have you written, a history of all of the games they've played, or is it literally just a name and a colour scheme? I'm always interested to hear what other people do with creating their teams and their armies for the respective games. Well, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I need to go away now and actually paint the rest of that team, but I really wanted to get separate painting videos out as quickly as I possibly could so you can enjoy it while you're waiting for your own copies to turn up. I think is the Bretonnian team that I want to play to start with in this edition and get back into playing Blood Bowl more regularly. But I've also painted some of the Tomb Kings now as well, coming up on a video very, very soon. I really like the way they came out, so I might be tempted aesthetically to give those a go at the same time as well. If you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a like and drop a comment below. It really helps the video be seen by other people, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. There's loads and loads of different content on the channel if you are finding me new for the first time because of these Blood Bowl videos, so do check the rest of the stuff out. I think there's over 500 videos, loads of painting tutorials, but loads of game discussion and things as well. If you'd like to support me and the channel, please do check out my Patreon. It is the very, very best way you can sort of fund me to keep making videos like this, so check out the link in the video description for that as well, along with a host of other affiliate links, including the Warhammer merch store if you're looking to pick up gifts for Christmas. And please do check out my channel sponsor, Counterattack Bases. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.